Top 10 Strangest Deaths in History. History is full of unusual endings where even the mightiest figures fell victim to bizarre mishaps. For example, one ancient account tells of the Greek playwright Aeschylus, an Olympic veteran and celebrated tragedian, who met his end in Sicily when an eagle dropped a tortoise on his head, mistaking his bald crown for a rock to crack the shell. In another unlikely tale, a notorious Russian mystic and royal confidant, Grigory Rasputin, survived poison and gunfire, only to finally perish when his assassins drowned him in a river after 3 shots failed to kill him. These are the kinds of odd tales we'll explore as we count down the top 10 strangest deaths in history. From medieval kings to ancient philosophers to Hollywood portraits of primeval monarchs. Each story is steeped in rich detail. The world the person lived in, their fateful final moments, and the aftermath of such extraordinary demises. Prepare for a gripping journey through history's most uncanny fatalities.
Number 10. Pope Adrian IV, choked by a fly. In 1159, England's Nicholas Breakspere became Pope Adrian IV, still the only Englishman ever to hold that office. By the time of his death in 1159, Adrian was embroiled in power struggles with Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa over church authority. According to contemporary chroniclers, Adrian had been negotiating with the emperor's envoys when, in a moment of both irony and calamity, a common housefly flew into his wine goblet. As he raised the glass to his lips, the insect drowned in the wine, and the pontiff inhaled it. Adrian immediately began choking uncontrollably. He collapsed and could not be revived. In effect, the supreme ruler of the medieval Christian world was undone by a mundane pest. This bizarre accident occurred shortly before the emperor could be excommunicated, abruptly ending Adrian's campaign against Frederick. The English-born pope's strange demise by a fly is so well attested that historians routinely cite it when cataloging odd ends of great personages. One chronicler dryly notes that Adrian IV perished while choking on a fly which was floating in his wineglass, a reminder that sometimes even a tiny insect can change the course of history. 9. King Martin of Aragon died laughing. King Martin I of Aragon, ruled 1396 to 1410, was a king with a reputation for being beset by poor health and strange omens. Legend holds that in the winter of 1410, Martin was suffering from severe indigestion after gorging on a large roasted goose one evening. As he lay uncomfortably in his royal chambers, his court jester, a man named Bora, appeared to cheer him up. When the king asked where Bora had been, the jester replied with a witty anecdote about a deer in the vineyard. At this moment, Martin, sickly and already cramped from overeating, burst into uncontrollable laughter. So intense was the fit of mirth that he literally laughed himself to death. Contemporary and later sources report that the king died of laughter shortly after hearing the joke. One medieval writer explicitly attributes his end to indigestion and uncontrollable laughter. The scene, as recorded by chroniclers, is almost darkly comic. The gaunt king, clutching his belly after the rich meal, receives the jester's punchline and begins to laugh so violently that he collapses. A medieval doctor was summoned, but there was nothing to be done. Martin expired amid gasps and tears of mirth. Modern historians suggest that Martin's fragile health and the shock of the joke combined to cause cardiac arrest. But the legend endures that a king quite literally died of laughter. His strange end was especially ironic for a monarch who had survived battles, plagues, and conspiracies, only to fall at a dinner table joke. This astonishing anecdote is one of the quirkiest royal deaths on record, and it has been retold in history books ever since. 8. King Edward II of England, tortured by a poker. The fate of Edward II, reigned 1307 to 1327, is one of the most gruesome and controversial royal deaths recorded. Edward, already politically unpopular and forced to abdicate, was imprisoned in 1327 by his enemies, barons loyal to his son. Contemporary chronicles circulated the lurid account that Edward's captors executed him in secret and in great cruelty. The most infamous version, preserved by later writers, says that Edward was pinned to the ground by his assassins, while a red-hot poker was inserted into his anus, ostensibly to leave no mark on his body. This gruesome tale comes primarily from texts like those used by playwright Christopher Marlowe. Its purpose may have been to suggest Edward was killed, but not by sword or poison, which would spare the young king from the stigma of a dishonorable death. Whether every detail is true, the story has become legendary. What is clear is that Edward II disappeared and was never seen again, leading to rumors that he was indeed murdered and tortured before being done in. The account of the poker execution was repeated for centuries and even appears in 14th century rhymes, though it was likely embellished to tarnish the memory of a deposed king. It remains uncertain whether Edward truly suffered this fate or simply died quietly in captivity, but the poker story is among the most bizarre tales of execution. If nothing else, it highlights how medieval chroniclers used extreme cruelty as a moral or political message, and how that message has echoed through history.
7. King Alexander I of Greece, killed by a pet monkey. King Alexander I of Greece, reigned 1917 to 1920, is perhaps best known for a diplomatic marriage and ruling during the turbulent period of World War I. But the oddest episode of his reign came from an encounter with animals in the royal garden. One summer day in 1920, Alexander was walking in the grounds of the royal residence. He was attempting to separate his large German shepherd from two monkeys, a Barbary macaque and its young, that lived in the palace gardens. As he tried to restrain his dog, Alexander's hand slipped, and the dog lunged at one monkey, but another monkey rose up and bit Alexander on the leg and later on the arm. The king's courtiers cleaned and dressed the wound, but due to his insistence, the incident was kept secret. They did not cauterize the bite or realize how serious it was. Over the next few days, the bite wound became severely infected. King Alexander's health rapidly deteriorated. He developed a high fever and delirium as the infection took hold. Despite desperate attempts by doctors to save him, Alexander died 5 days later, on October 25, 1920. In a cruel twist of fate, the young king who had weathered wars and political crises was felled by a monkey bite, essentially from a pet monkey in his own palace. Alexander's death caused a constitutional crisis in Greece and led to his country's repudiation of the monarchy for 2 decades. The event is often cited as one of history's stranger accidental deaths, a head of state undone not by bullets or disease, but by an infection from an innocent-looking animal bite.
6. Aeschylus, killed by a dropped tortoise. Aeschylus, c. 525 to 456 BC, was a towering figure of ancient Athens, a playwright who fought at Marathon and at Salamis, his epitaph touting martial valor rather than the arts. His death, however, became the stuff of legend and mystery. The Roman writer Valerius Maximus relates that in 456 BC, while Aeschylus was visiting the city of Gela in Sicily, he was sitting outdoors when an eagle, hunting to feed its mate, picked up a tortoise and flew overhead. The bald eagle, needing to crack the tortoise's shell to eat it, dropped the tortoise from a height onto what it mistook for a rock, but which was actually Aeschylus's head. The shell smashed into the poet's skull, killing him instantly. Aeschylus had long been warned of a prophecy that he would die by a falling object, so some interpret the event as a tragic fulfillment of fate. Whatever the truth, the tale was recorded by multiple ancient sources and has been told ever since as an unparalleled freak accident. In one version of the story, Aeschylus had gone outside to evade the prophecy, not to invite it. But ultimately his bald pate was unlucky enough to have an eagle's tortoise drop land on it.
The bizarre nature of this death, a great mind crushed by turtle shell, has captivated writers and historians for millennia. Today, scholars remain amused at the coincidence of the eagle's method of feeding leading to a man's end. Thus, the first great tragedian of Greece earned an epitaph in apocryphal lore, slain by a tortoise and an eagle rather than by fate or man.
5. Chrysippus died laughing at a drunken donkey. Chrysippus of Solai, 279 to 206 BC, was one of the most influential philosophers of the ancient world and a principal figure of Stoicism. He died around age 73, but not of the wine or indigestion some sources suggest. A vivid anecdote claims that it was laughter that killed him. The story goes that on one occasion, Chrysippus witnessed a donkey eating figs that had been fermented, i.e. partly rotted, for passing slaves. Amused, he joked aloud, "Give that donkey some unmixed wine to wash down those figs." According to Diogenes Laertius, a 3rd century biographer, at this moment Chrysippus laughed so hard that his sides burst and he died on the spot. Although we cannot verify the literal truth of this tale, it became a well-known part of the philosopher's legend. Ancient writers called him the man who died laughing at his own joke. The description in Diogenes Laertius reads, "He was watching a donkey eat some figs and cried out, 'Now give the donkey a drink of pure wine to wash down the figs,' whereupon he died in a fit of laughter." Whether or not a concurrent heart condition was a factor, Chrysippus's death is remembered as one of those incredible historical anecdotes. It stands as a reminder that even the most stoic sages were not immune to life's absurdities, and that laughter truly can be deadly, at least according to legend. 4. Sigurd the Mighty, Cheen of the Orkneys, killed by an enemy's tooth. Sigurd Eastensson, known as Sigurd the Mighty, was a 9th century Viking chieftain and earl of the Orkney Islands, off northern Scotland. He led Norse raids deep into mainland Scotland. According to tradition, he bested a formidable Pictish rival named Mild Bricta, the Bucktooth, by tricking him into battle. Sigurd showed up with 80 men to Mild Bricta's 40. After defeating Mild Bricta's army and personally beheading the enemy king, Sigurd tied the severed head to his saddle as a war trophy for the ride home. However, fate had a grim sense of irony in store. As Sigurd rode across the rough terrain, Mild Bricta's protruding front tooth scratched the exposed skin on Sigurd's calf. The wound seemed minor, but it soon became painfully inflamed. Infection set in rapidly. Within days, Sigurd, who had been considered invincible in battle, was dead, felled not by sword or spear, but by the tooth of a vanquished foe. Contemporary accounts and later retellings record Sigurd's end with grim detachment. The wound became infected, and Sigurd the Mighty died soon afterward. In modern terms, we might guess sepsis, but the tale emphasizes poetic justice. The last vestige of the defeated Pict's body slew the victor. Sigurd's fate is often cited as one of history's most bizarre. A Viking warlord, mighty in life, was undone by the tooth of a decapitated man. His story reminds us that in battle, sometimes the smallest detail can turn into a lethal enemy.
3. Attila the Hun, choked on his own blood. Attila the Hun, circa 406 to 453 AD, was the fearsome leader of the Huns who menaced the Roman Empire. His death, however, came quietly and strangely. In the spring of 453 AD, Attila married a young woman named Ildiko. To celebrate the wedding feast, Attila indulged in an enormous amount of food and, especially, wine. According to the historian Priscus and later chroniclers, Attila drank copious amounts of wine as part of the revelry. After the banquet, he retired to bed feeling satiated and drunk. Sometime that night, Attila experienced a massive nosebleed.
Overcome by wine and asleep on his back, he began bleeding heavily through the nose. Because he could not wake up, blood trickled into his throat. Tragically, the blood flowing down his throat choked him to death. When his body was discovered the next morning, Attila had apparently died in his sleep. The cause was recorded as the excessive flow of blood choking him. A nosebleed turned fatal. One historian described it starkly. Quote, "He passed out on his back in bed. He suffered a heavy nosebleed. Attila was unable to wake, and blood streamed down his throat and choked him to death." End quote. Whether this account is entirely accurate or partly mythologized, it has become the accepted version. The legendary scourge of Europe met his end through nothing more dramatic than the effects of drinking too much in a bleeding problem. Attila's body was undisturbed and showed no signs of foul play, which supports the idea that it was a freak natural cause. Thus, after years of terrorizing Roman armies, Attila was bested by one of the most mundane causes, a hemorrhage, underscoring how even the strongest can fall by chance.
2. Grigory Rasputin survived poison and bullets, drowned in river. The death of Grigory Rasputin, 1869 to 1916, is legendary for its brutality and near-mythical resistance. Rasputin was a Siberian peasant turned mystic who became a close advisor and perhaps lover of influence to Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra of Russia. By late 1916, a group of nobles feared Rasputin's sway over the royals and conspired to kill him. The accounts of his murder are dramatic. Prince Felix Yusupov and others lured Rasputin to a midnight gathering at a palatial residence in St. Petersburg. They offered him pastries and wine laced with cyanide. Rasputin ate and drank heartily, but, as the conspirators claimed, the poison had no effect. Shocked, the assassins insisted on serving him more wine, also poisoned. Rasputin drank 3 full glasses calmly. When Rasputin still showed no sign of ill health, one conspirator drew a pistol and shot him in the chest. Believing him dead, the killers went to dispose of the body. Miraculously, Rasputin sprang up, shouting incoherently. The men gave chase. During the pursuit, Yusupov shot Rasputin again in the head, finally delivering a mortal wound. To ensure he was dead, they wrapped his body and dropped it into a river, the frigid Neva, just to be certain they had finished the job. When fishermen later recovered the body, it reportedly showed water in the lungs, as if Rasputin had managed to draw breath while submerged, though this is debated by historians. The upshot is clear. Rasputin died only after surviving poison, bullets, and finally drowning. His end makes him a controversial figure even in death. Some wonder if his eerie survival instincts contributed to the myth that he was cursed. But at face value, his story is one of the strangest murder accounts ever told. A man who shrugged off toxins and gunshots and met his end by the cold river beneath the St. Petersburg bridges.
1. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden ate himself to death. The top spot goes to a surprisingly comic yet fatal gluttony. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden, 1710 to 1771, who in his final hours indulged in a feast so prodigious that he literally ate himself to death. Adolf Frederick ruled from 1751 to 1771 and was known for his love of food. In February 1771, during the carnival before Lent, known in Sweden as Fettisdagen or Shrove Tuesday, the king sat down to an extravagant meal. He consumed lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, kippers, and champagne in course after course. For the crowning dessert, he indulged in 14 servings of semla, a rich cardamom-spiced wheat bun filled with almond paste and whipped cream, traditionally eaten that day. Each semla was served in a bowl of hot milk, creating what's called hetfag in Sweden. Overcome by the enormous quantity of food, King Adolf complained of stomach pain. He was carried to his chambers and shortly afterward died that same evening. Physicians later recorded the cause of death as a stroke caused by dietary excess. But popular lore had its own interpretation. It became widely repeated that Adolf ate himself to death.
History notes that this astonishing amount of food was enough to end the king's life, calling him one of the few rulers in history to have eaten himself to death. In Swedish tradition, Adolf Fredrik is remembered with a sort of dark humor as the king who died from eating 15 or 14 semlor. Even Snopes calls it a legend that he died after eating a meal topped off with 14 buns, which nonetheless captures the odd truth. Gluttony, quite literally, brought down a monarch. In the decades since, King Adolf's unusual death has become a cautionary tale and a quirky historical footnote. Each year in Sweden, news outlets still report King Adolf Fredrik ate himself to death as Mardi Gras begins, as a reminder of the king's final overindulgence. It is a fittingly odd climax to our list, a royal not felled by murder or accident, but by an appetite that exceeded all common sense.
Throughout history, death has found people in almost every conceivable way. The stories above, from an eagle's tortoise to a buffet of Simla, remind us that the end can come as oddly as life itself. Each of these deaths is well attested by chroniclers or historians, proving that real life can be as strange as fiction. Ultimately, these tales serve as eerie curiosities, poignant reminders that no one, however powerful or pious, can entirely escape the caprices of fate.